Hey guys, Chairman here. So this year I've had the opportunity to judge at basically every single North American Bushiroad Spring Fest, as you can see from the center marker. And so yeah, I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of you guys out in every single region, and it's been a wonderful time. I feel so privileged and so honored to have this opportunity. And there's one more left in Houston. I will be going this weekend, so if you're going, please say hi. It's going to be the biggest one because it's the last one. I think a lot of people are taking the opportunity to go. So it's going to be really exciting. And I just wanted to make this video right before Houston to kind of talk about some of the common mistakes I see Westward players making in a tournament that either affects their gameplay, like maybe because they made the mistake, they played suboptimally, or even created a illegal game state that, us judges, we look for, and that could result in a severe warning, a very awkward kind of rewinding of the situation, or in some cases we can't even rewind the situation, and that would result in a game loss. So this is definitely something you should watch out for. So if you're a new player to, especially if this is your first tournament, it's going to be very different from casual play or even shop tournament play, because there are judges. We will be taking the rules quite seriously, and sometimes you really need to have pretty clean and precise play at this kind of level. And so this is a great way to kind of get a glimpse and just remind yourself what's important, what are the judges looking for, and what you need to pay attention to. And if you're a veteran player, then be sure to have all these things, under your belt. If you're still making these kinds of mistakes, that's not a good look for you. So so this will be 3 common mistakes that I see White Sharks players make all the time that will affect your tournament performance and could potentially lead to a game loss. So let's get started with the first one. So the first thing I want to talk about is paying costs. Now, when we pay costs, the first step is always to declare the ability or the effect that we're paying the cost for. For example, if I'm going to use a brainstorm, I need to first say I'm going to use this brainstorm effect, and then I pay the cost of 1 stock, and then the tap the character, which is part of the cost. And that way we will be able to resolve the effect, right? Obviously, in a situation like this, we wouldn't just start paying costs first, because we have 2 effects, 2 brainstorm effects that are different and have the same cost. So if we just start paying costs first and I say brainstorm, and then my opponent says which brainstorm, right? That's, obviously we wouldn't do that. We would say, oh yeah, I want to use the Russia brainstorm, the hot timer brainstorm, right? So I think that's pretty obvious. But for some reason, when players want to play a card from their hand, so often I see players just start paying the cost. They say, oh, I'm going to play this Fubuki early play heal, right? And that's just incorrect. You need to declare that you're playing this card. You need to reveal the card saying, I want to play this card. You actually need to choose the position that the card is going to. Then you pay the cost, and you need to resolve the effect. And why that's important is exactly in this situation. I don't have green, right? I'm level 2, 3 clock, but I just don't have green. And if you start paying the cost first, and then you reveal oh, I want to play this green card, your opponent says, you don't have green, sir, right? You've already paid the cost, right? And which is not a really big deal in this case, since the waiting room is pretty clean, so we can just put these cards back, right? But what if in the situation that one of these cards was a blind stock, was information that you weren't supposed to have, right? Then suddenly, all of a sudden, you get this unfair advantage that is potentially game breaking, right? If you get an unfair advantage that you can't give back to your opponent, or it can't be reversed in a way that's fair, then that would be a game loss. Now, actually, there is a way to reverse even blind stock, but I don't think every single judge kind of knows the technique or is comfortable enough, even if they know the technique, to, perform it. And so, maybe if you get in a situation where you pay out blind stock and your opponent says, oh yeah, he paid out some blind stock, got some extra information, a judge might just say, I can't reverse this, and you did get an unfair advantage, so that would be a game loss, right? So whenever you pay costs, remember, just as with brainstorms and cards in hand, you always declare the card first, right? So I want to play this Toa. You actually declare the stage position that you want to play it on. Let's say I want to play this Toa right here. Then you begin to pay costs. And this gives your opponent plenty of time to, check if you have color, or it gives you even plenty of time to be like, okay, do I have color and stuff like that? So always pay the cost after declaring the effect, right? So whether you're using a counter, whether you're using a brainstorm or on-field ability, whether you're playing a card from your hand, always declare the card, reveal it. In the case of a card coming from your hand, you actually need to choose the zone that it's going to, and then you pay the cost. And if you do this, then you'll definitely not get into as many problematic situations as you would if you just forgot to do this. The second thing I want to talk about is taking damage. So a lot of times when players take damage, they reveal cards from the top of their deck and put it immediately into clock as damage. And the reason why this is bad is because that's not how the game works, right? Cards don't go directly to clock, they go into a resolution zone first, and then after all the damage is moved to the resolution zone, then it gets moved from the resolution zone to the clock. And the reason why this is important is, let's say like you're just putting the cards in your clock, you're like, oh, I need to level up, and it's like, oh, suddenly, I cancel, then it's like, wait, how much damage did I take again, right? Maybe sometimes like you'll forget, you're like, oh, I only took 2 damage, and then you only cancel 2 or whatever, or like, oh, I took 4 damage, and all of a sudden now it's like, wait, weren't you at 3-5 before? So like, just putting it directly into your clock can really confuse the situation. Always make sure they go into a like a resolution zone anywhere you want floating on the board, and then so that when it gets canceled, it goes directly from resolution zone into the waiting room, and don't kind of mess up your clock area. And this is especially important if you're getting close to the end of your deck, because let's say in this situation, your opponent swings for 2, right, on the last attack, and you go 1, 2. Oh, I need a refresh, but wait, I need to level up as well, right? And then you're like, oh shoot, do I level up first? Do I refresh first? Do I get to choose, right? And so obviously, like, then you get to this weird situation, but this is not the correct situation, right? This is not supposed to be here. This is supposed to be in resolution zone. You have to refresh first because you've run out of deck. This is not in your clock yet. You haven't taken the damage. You're not supposed to level up first. So you refresh first, and then you take the damage, and then you level up, and then you take the refresh point, right? And so this order is really important, because if you were, let's say in this situation, you did this, and you're like, oh, let me level up first, and you decide to level up first for some reason, and then you refresh, oh shoot, all of a sudden, that's just an irreversible game state, because you're not allowed to level up first, right? Like, that's just, you're not allowed to, even if it doesn't give you an advantage. But like, let's say maybe there was like a bunch of climaxes there, you wanted to put it back into your deck, all of a sudden, oh shoot, I couldn't level up first, now I'm in a illegal game state. Can we rewind this? I would say most judges wouldn't be able to, because I don't think both players could agree on the 6 cards that were in clock or the 5 cards that were in clock before you shuffle it all back. So yeah, this would probably just be a game loss, because there's no way to rewind the situation, and you're in an illegal game state because you leveled up before refreshing when you didn't have that opportunity at all, right? So make sure that when you take damage, right, always put it into a resolution zone first, right? So as you're taking, let's say, I'm gonna take 2 damage here. So 1, 2, okay, I take the 2 damage, then move it all to your clock, and then you can continue to play like resolve effects and stuff like that, right? So yeah, that's really important, and if you do it in the wrong way, that will definitely get you in trouble sometimes, so please do not do that. The final thing I want to talk about is the Encore Step, and that's the final step in the attack phase. It's actually right here on the tutorial mat in green, and this is where you kind of resolve what happens to all the reverse characters that are on the field. So the turn player goes first, and the non-turn player, and then for every character that's reversed, they can choose to send it to the waiting room, obviously mandatory, and then they can choose to encore or use any kind of other effect of the character. Now, what I see a lot of players do, there's kind of 2 big mistakes that players do. Sometimes I just see players kind of put them all into waiting room at the same time, which is not incorrect, but then they'll start resolving abilities, and depending on how they resolve the abilities, it could be illegal. For example, in this case, when they put them all into waiting room at the same time, they say, okay, I want to use Fubuki's effect, and then they look 4, they discard 1, look it up to 4, right, and add 1, and then they start refreshing, right? Let's pretend we refresh, and then they say, okay, take the refresh damage. Now I want to resolve Aqua's effect that I sent from stage to the waiting room. Well, you can't, because the Aqua's not on the stage anymore. It's not being sent to the waiting room. You already sent it to the waiting room like a long time ago, and then you've missed the timing for it, because now the Aqua's in deck. It's not in waiting room. You can't use the effect anymore, right? So if you try to use the Aqua effect right now, well, first of all, you wouldn't have any waiting room, but let's pretend that you did have a waiting room that you could clock to use Aqua's effect, and you did reveal cards that's a legal game state, and it could be pretty hard to reverse that one. So definitely make sure that you do these effects all one at a time, right? You definitely don't want to do them all at once, because again, that's not how it works, right? You send one character at a time from the stage to the waiting room, and then you go Fubuki first, or you go Aqua first. And in this situation, you actually can save multiple characters if you do the order correct, right? So if you do Fubuki first, and then you pay 3 Encore, then you can't use the Roboco Encore. But if you send the Roboco first, like this, you can use the Roboco's pay 1 Encore, and then you still have 3 stock, and then you still have characters you haven't sent. So let's say you send the Fubuki now, and then you can use the pay 3 Encore. And you can save multiple characters if you want with the Roboco effect like that. So it's really important to be able to send them one at a time like that. It just gives you the most control over your board, and then also it prevents you from accidentally doing something weird like trying to resolve Aqua after resolving the Fubuki if both of them are already in the waiting room. The second thing that I see a lot of players do is just not send the card to the waiting room. Like for example, they're like, okay, Aqua is dead, so I'm gonna use Aqua's effect. And then so they go like pay 1. They're like, okay, all right, like clock 1 from waiting room, and then do the effect. But the Aqua needs to be in the waiting room for this effect to happen, right? And then they resolve 2, right? But that's actually illegal. Like Aqua's not in the waiting room. And now in this case, it's not a big deal that you don't have the Aqua in the waiting room, and it's not like they'll like do it and then they'll put the Aqua in afterwards. Important thing is that if you move the Aqua into the waiting room, you actually can use the Aqua as the target for the cost. Right, so if let's say you're missing blue and you didn't have any other Aquas, you could actually clock the Aqua that you sent from stage 2 waiting room for its own effect, right? So that's really important that the Aqua's in the waiting room. But let's say you go like, okay, I'm going to use Fubuki effect right now. So like discard a Fubuki, reveal, add this, and then start shuffling, and then refresh. Uh-oh, that Fubuki is supposed to go back in with the refresh, right? Because it needs to be in the waiting room at the time, of doing this refresh. So let's say you refresh, and then you go like, okay, refresh, take the refresh damage, and then these all die, whatever, and draw a card, and all of a sudden you realize, oh shoot, the Fubuki, I used the Fubuki effect, but the Fubuki's in waiting room, and then I drew a card, which means that a card has gone from a hidden zone, right, your deck, into another hidden zone, which is your hand, but you, the player, has information your opponent doesn't, and that draw could have been this Fubuki, right? This Fubuki is supposed to be in this deck, right? So your deck is an illegal deck right now. The Fubuki is supposed to be there, and then you just drew a card from your illegal deck. This could have been the Fubuki, right? And so unfortunately, like, strictly speaking, this is a game loss because you've drawn a card from an illegal deck that has given you an advantage, right? Even though, like, maybe this deck is really big, the chances of you drawing this one Fubuki is not very high. It's still there, right? It's still an unfair advantage, even though it's very small. And so, yeah, I think maybe in earlier rounds, like, depending on the situation, your judge might be a little bit more lenient. But in top tables, for sure, that is just the game loss right there, right? Because you have gotten an unfair advantage, no matter how slight. And this is a tournament. This is a very competitive event where players, are expected to perform with competitive integrity and follow the rules because everybody wants to win. There's like some really great prizing out there, so it feels really bad that a player can, do something wrong or break the rules and not be, punished or penalized for it if they get an advantage. So yeah, so these are like kind of the 3 main things that I see players do a lot. So let's review. So first thing is paying cost before playing before revealing the card from hand, right? So make sure you always pay the cost after you reveal the card. Say I want to play this here, and then pay the cost. All right. The second thing that I see a lot of players do is taking damage directly into the clock, right? Don't do that. One at a time, or you can even do like a little bit more. Like you can flip a few more, but then make sure it goes into resolution zone so that if you do cancel, it can go to the waiting room, or you move them all at the same time, and so that if you do level up, it happens after the damage is moved from the resolution zone to your clock, so that you don't do this weird thing where you level up before refresh even though you're not supposed to be able to. And then the last thing is, of course, when you're during the Encore Step, one at a time, move the character. If you need to physically move the character just to remind you that the character's in the waiting room, like, please do that. That's proper play, right? If you really want to like shortcut it, you can kind of like, like let's say you're gonna encore this, you're like, okay, maybe I don't need to move it because I'm gonna bring it right back, right? But like, let's say if this is a clock encore, this is how people get into trouble with this thing though. Like, let's say this is a clock encore. So you're like, oh, I want to clock encore this. Clock encore. All right, it gets rested, refresh. Nope, that's illegal, right? Because what happens during the clock encore, if it's the last card in deck, this goes into waiting room. You clock yourself from your deck. Refresh happens immediately, right? It's an interrupt. And now you try to move the card from your waiting room back into your stage, but the card's not there anymore. So if you have one card left in deck and you try to clock Encore with any kind of a card, that's not allowed. So yeah, in those situations, it makes sense to just move it to the waiting room, you know, pay the cost, and then be like, oh, that's how it works, right? So yeah, those are the top 3 mistakes I see Weiss players making all the time. You know, in my almost 7 years of judging, you know, I see players do this just constantly, and you know, I just wanted to make a PSA out there, especially for this last event, this Houston event. It's gonna be really big. It's gonna be really exciting. Don't let a misplay ruin your tournament chances, right? So make sure you are aware of the rules. If you have any questions, or if you're like stuck, or you're like, oh, I forgot, how is this supposed to work? Feel free to raise your hand, call judge. That's what we're here for. We're here to make sure that you guys are following the rules, know the rules, and are just having a good time. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. If you're going to Houston, once again, good luck to you and your team. If you see me, don't be a stranger. Feel free to say hi, and I'll see you out there. All right, this is it for this one. See you guys.